Hey there. I want to talk a bit about learning. I'm not going to go into the in depth into how it works from a neurological standpoint, but I want to point out a couple of things that are important. And you need to be reading this in your text because I'm going to jump in the middle here, and you're going to need the background from your textbook reading to make this make sense. Because I don't want to belabor a point about the basics. You'll get those from your rating. So let's quickly just talk a wee tiny bit about definitions, and it's not going to be new for most of you. Probably you've heard something related to this, but let's do this and see how it goes for you. Learning, by definition, is the acquisition of knowledge or skills through experience, study, or being taught. You're learning every day. You're having experiences every day. You learn something. It may not be earth shattering, might be something very minor, might be an adjustment in something that you do and you find out a better way to do it, so on and so forth. I think you get that picture. So that's what learning is. And then there's a particular type of learning that has its own little category. It's called conditioning. And the reason it's different is because, yes, it's learning, but it has to do with associations. So I make these connections. Something happens and I connect. Ivan Pavlov and the studies he did with the salivation of dogs laid the groundwork for what became known as classical conditioning. Classical conditioning simply basic learning, first learning, new learning. Conditioning means learning. And classical in this case means, in essence, means first learning or basic learning. So Pavlov worked with the dogs, and you can read about what the experiments were like. Basically, what the dogs learned to do is associate, the big word associate, feeding with an individual that fed them in Pavlov's lab. When they would see this guy, they would already start slobbering because they knew they were going to get fed. And it was discovered by accident. And again, you can read about it. They tried different variables, and they determined that yes, the dogs could in fact make associations. And then you move to John Watson, who worked with a baby named Albert, and basically wound up causing some problems. But he wanted to test this classical learning stuff on humans to see if it happened the same way, and it does. We just have a better reasoning ability than animals. So, in the end, little Albert was left with this fear, and I won't go into those details. It's a whole nother story. But in the end, he was left with a fear of white furry things because they had used a lab rat in the experiments, and nobody knows whether he ever got over that. Most likely he did, because one way that learning deteriorates is through a process called extinction. Basically, you're forgetting. Now, if you learn something, you never unlearn it. You possess it from now on. If you use it or don't use it, uh, governs whether or not you're up to speed with it. So, with all that in mind, I want to move beyond that, and I want to move into briefly a short discussion about operant conditioning because it's a higher level learning. Classical conditioning is very basic. Animals are good at classical conditioning type learning. Human beings are, of course. Uh, and then we move into a higher order. Some primates can do that, gorillas and monkeys. But we operate in the realm of operant conditioning. Conditioning, again, means learning. Operant, what are we talking about here? We're talking about choices you make. You encounter something and you make a choice. You choose a behavior related to that, and then you suffer whatever the consequences are. good consequences or bad consequences? Then I make the right choice. And this can be in anything. Choice, what college am I going to? Usually we're talking about more immediate things. Mom told me to be home at 9 o'clock tonight, and here it is 10, and I'm not there yet. So I disobeyed. Maybe I did it by choice. I just couldn't bring myself to leave my friends. We were having such a good time, and now I will be paying consequences. So operant conditioning has to do with consequences. And there are two things to consider: reinforcement, which is positive stuff, and punishment, which is negative stuff. And then you can even break those down: positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, negative punishment. You're dealing with math in those cases. Again, that's more of your reading. I want you to read about that rather than me spend another hour sitting here explaining that. What I really want you to understand is that higher order learning is consequential and voluntary, and classical conditioning is involuntary. It's a connection that you make. If I touch a hot stove and burns my finger, I know now, don't touch the hot stove. That's classical conditioning. You had a stimulus and a response. And in that case, not a very pleasant one. So, operant conditioning, consequences. And then we move into what is called the law of effect. This is Edward Thorndike, his theory, law of effect. And this makes good sense. And this is not tricky at all. It's fancily worded. I'm going to give you the fancy wording. The probability of an action being repeated is strengthened if it is followed by a pleasant or satisfying consequence. I'll say that again. The probability of an action being repeated is strengthened if it is followed by a pleasant or satisfying consequence. In other words, rewarded behavior is more likely to recur. If you do something and I reward you for it, you're more likely to repeat that behavior. You studied for the next quiz and you made an A, and I award the A. You earned it, but I give it to you, of course. And you go, whoa, well, I studied hard for that. I want to make another A. That's the law of effect. So, very simple, very profound. The law of effect. Edward Thorndike and his law of effect. Pretty simple. By the way, let me back up just a moment because you're potentially going to hear this. Operant conditioning is also known as Skinnerian learning. Skinnner. Erian. Skinnerian. B.F. Skinner, because he did a lot of work in this area. Look him up. Got a weird first and middle name. Very an iconic psychologist, I'll put it that way. Very well known in psychology circles. So, you are classically conditioned. You are trained through operant conditioning. And we have different methods of that. We use positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement. Both of those are good, although you hear the word negative, that throws a lot of people off because they think that that's bad. Negative reinforcement is good. It's good for you because we take things away that are things that are unpleasant for you because you were good. For example, your chore on Saturday mornings is to clean your dorm room. Or let's say clean your room at home. That's a better example. You get up on Saturday, I got to clean my room this morning. Oh, no. Well, you obeyed a rule yesterday that pleased your parent, and your parent wants to use negative reinforcement to reward you. So they say, hey, You came home when I asked you to come home at the time I asked you to, and so guess what? You don't have to clean your room on Saturday morning. That's negative reinforcement. How the room gets cleaned is immaterial. The fact is, you don't have to do it. So something was taken away. Positive reinforcement would be ask you to be home at 9 o'clock p.m. on Friday, and you were home at 9 o'clock p.m. I'm so happy. I'm going to take you out to McDonald's for breakfast Saturday morning. You still got to clean your room. We didn't take that away. But that's positive reinforcement. And you can do the same thing with punishment. Add, subtract. I told you to do whatever and you didn't do it, so now I'm going to spank you. Or you didn't do it, and that's positive punishment. Negative punishment would be you did something I asked you not to do, so I'm going to ground you. I'm taking away your freedom. So it's just simple math. That's all it is. Can I overdo reinforcement? Can I overdo punishment? Yes. Talk about that in a minute. Can I overdo reinforcement? And yes, you can. If I overdo reinforcement, then what do? I reinforce everything. I'm giving you a pat on the back for everything you do. And eventually what you're going to wind up doing is creating someone who believes in entitlement. You owe me this. You obeyed the rules, and I obeyed the rules, and now you owe me for that. Well, that's not the case. You obey the rules are there, and you're supposed to obey the rules. Now, certain situations, they may be happy, yeah, I'm going to reinforce that. But you shouldn't expect that every time you do what you're supposed to do. And then punishment's a little more complicated than that. Punishment, as far as being overused, can create some side effects. Now, some of you are from cultures where punishment is like it is here. Where our culture tends to be a punishment-oriented culture. Not beating some kid half to death, not that kind of punishment, but not a reward situation. When you don't obey the rules in America, many times you get punished. I'm talking about as you're coming through with your parents. So what happens if a parent gets carried away with this business? I'm going to run over these real quick. They're important, and I'm going to take each one and spend a few minutes with each one. Side effects of punishment. Increased aggression. What does that mean? That means that you are receiving punishment, and the reward that comes from that is for the punisher. So mom spanks you. You do something, you're a little person, girl, boy. Mom spanks you because you did something wrong, and you don't do that again. So the next day you do something else wrong. She goes, well, I spanked him for that, him, her, and it worked, so I'm going to spank him for this. So now we get a cycle started. Every time you do something, you get a spanking. Well, guess what? That's not good. Because the parent is falsely rewarded because the parent thinks they're doing the right thing. They're not taking into account the potential of positive reinforcement, which gets rid of all this punishment business. So what happens to the child? The child may fall into a pattern of what's called increased aggression. Now, they're not going to go smack their parent right in the mouth because you're a lot bigger than they are, and they're not that, hopefully not that brave. It happens, I guess. But they have this increased aggression. So who do they take that out on? They don't take it out on the parent. They take it out on people weaker than they are. In the daycare or in the first or second or fifth grade or whatever the case is, they become bullies. And unfortunately, some of those grow into abusers. So now you got a grown-up who was punished a lot, corporal punishment or whatever it is, and now they're a grown-up and they get into a romantic relationship and now they become an abuser of their partner in the relationship. Or they abuse their children when they come along, not because they're a bully. By that point, they become an abuser because all this uh, punishment over and over again when they were young. It's not true for everybody, but it can happen. So the next one that I want to talk about very quickly is passive aggressiveness. A punished person feels compelled to strike back, but they can't, so they just rebel in other ways. And you can think of 1,000,001 ways. Oh, I didn't clean my room. Oh, I forgot. No, you didn't. You just were rebelling because you were tired of being punished, or you didn't like being punished. Nobody does. The next one on our list is avoidance, and that's what it says. A punished person tries to avoid the punisher, eventually maybe running away, which is a bad thing. So I'm punished, and now I'm not going home anymore because I can't live that way any longer. Temporary suppression is next on the list. Temporary suppression versus elimination. Suppressing an unacceptable behavior until the threat of punishment passes, and this says temporary suppression versus, the label says temporary suppression versus elimination. You can guess what elimination is. Don't do the bad behavior. So you don't suppress it, you're going to get caught eventually anyway. It's like going down the interstate and you see you're doing 20 over the posted speed limit, and you see a trooper and you slow down, and now you're the best law abider in the world. And then once you're out of his range, and bam, you're right back up to 20 or 30 over the speed limits. That's temporary suppression. That's a dangerous thing. And last, finally, learned helplessness. Learned helplessness is exactly what it says. Person in a situation where they find no escape, or they make attempts to escape the punishment over and over again, and they just can't. Most of this is in abusive relationships, by the way. Male on female, female on male, male on male, female on female, whatever their relationship is. And they try to get out of that abusive relationship, and they have failure after failure after failure. And this teaches them falsely that they're desperate, that they have no way, and they give in to it. It's learned helplessness. I'm helpless. I can't get out of this situation. Find that frequently in abusive situations, in marriages and other relationships. So, not a very happy situation. And there are aides, there are agencies, etc., that can then come in, step in, and take care of those things. Police departments try, but you actually need to be in a more long drawn out situation so you can get your life together if you're in something like that. Hope you're not, but nonetheless, there you have it. I'm thinking that I want to go ahead and introduce you, and as a matter of fact I will, to Albert Bandura. Albert Bandura, his studies were done in something called cognitive social learning. Cognitive social learning. Now, here again, this is a combination of things. This is one of those many things. I say here again because there are a lot of parts to this. There are a lot of things working here. So, what is this based on? Well, look at the title of it: Cognitive Social Learning. It's an emphasis on the role of thinking and social learning and behavior. It's based on interpretation. So where do you get your interpretations from? What's another word for interpretation? I taught you that day one. Another word for interpretation is perception. How do I understand this? What do I understand about it? How do I interpret what I'm dealing with? And what guides that? Attitudes, beliefs, expectations, motivations, emotions. Where do you learn all that from? Your culture. Your culture teaches you every one of those things. Attitude, belief, expectation, motivation, emotion. It tells you how to be a member of the culture. So you interpret things based on your culture. How do you learn new things? In your culture, by observation and then imitation. That should make perfect sense. That's what cognitive social learning is. So I watch something, I observe it, and then I imitate it. And hopefully it's the correct way of doing whatever it is you're dealing with. Talking to somebody or whatever the case is, doesn't matter. Bandura did a study called the Bobo doll experiment, B-O-B-O doll. That was a toy in America, I'm sure around the rest of the world. It was an inflatable cone about 3 feet tall or so, and it was weighted at the bottom, and it was like a beach ball material, and you could punch it and it'd fall over and flop back up. And he had children interact with this Bobo doll, and he videoed it, and then he showed the video to other children, and some children beat the doll up, and some children hugged it and cared for it. And the children's reaction to that was whatever video they watched. If they watched a violent video, then they were violent toward this Bobo doll. If they watched a loving video, then they were loving toward the Bobo doll. He established that there are 4 things that had to be present. And I'll give you these and we'll be done. Attention, retention, reproduction, and reinforcement. I have to be paying attention. I have to retain what I saw. I have to reproduce that behavior, and then the behavior is reinforced. If it's not reinforced, then potential for the learning to take place lessens. So there you have it. Cognitive social learning, very simple. Albert Bandura. You'll hear about that guy later. Well, we got 2 weeks left, so I don't know if you'll hear about him more or not. Probably not. But anyway, there you go. A little bit of learning. There's a lot more to learning than that. Read your textbook and make sure that you understand what you're reading. Send me questions if you need to. Email them to me. I'll work with you. That's what I'm here for. Don't forget the quizzes, and I'll see you next time.